The first howl sliced through the twilight hush, a silver blade of sound against the vast, indifferent canvas of the Arizona Territory. On her porch, Lindsay Northrop didn't flinch. She simply set down her mending the worn fabric of her father's old shirt, a familiar weight in her hands. Another howl joined the first, closer this time, laced with a predatory hunger that could curdle a man's blood. But Lindsay wasn't just any woman. She was a creature of this unforgiving land, her heart beating in time with its savage rhythm. She picked up the Winchester, leaning against the cabin wall. What she found in the dying light wasn't just a pack of wolves cornering their prey, but a lone rider, down and fighting for his life, a discovery that would unravel a secret as old and dangerous as the mountains themselves. The high desert air grew teeth as the sun bled out behind the Dragoon Mountains. It was a cold that crept into the bones, a stark reminder from the land that it was and always would be the ultimate arbiter of life and death. For Lindsay Northrop, this cold was a familiar companion. It had been her only confidant in the 3 years since the fever took her father, leaving her the sole heir to a hard-scrabble ranch teetering on the edge of Apache territory. The ranch, a modest patch of defiant green carved out of the ochre dust, was her entire world. She knew every creak of the cabin's floorboards, the particular groan of the well pump on a dry morning, and the distinct scent of creosote bush after a rare desert rain. She also knew the sounds of the night, and this was a sound of imminent death. The chorus of howls was a symphony of slaughter, not the lonely call of a single wolf, but the coordinated strategic cries of a pack that had found something vulnerable. Grabbing the heavy Winchester Model 1873 from its pegs by the door, she moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice. Her father had taught her to shoot before he'd taught her to bake bread. "Out here, Lindsay," he'd said, his voice raspy from the dust. "And years. A steady hand is worth more than a soft heart." She'd long since learned a person needed both to survive. She moved not towards the safety of her bolted door, but towards the sound her worn leather boots making little noise on the packed earth. The moon, a sliver of bone white, offered little light. She navigated by memory, her senses honed sharp by solitude. The frantic, terrified whinny of a horse cut through the growling, followed by a human cry of pain, sharp and guttural. Cresting a small rise that overlooked a dried-up arroyo, she saw the scene laid out like a grim tableau. A massive grey wolf. The alpha had a dark horse by the throat, pulling the animal down, while the rest of the pack, 6 or 7 of them, swarmed a figure on the ground. The man was on his back, a long knife flashing in his hand, but he was losing. A wolf darted in, tearing at his leg, and another lunged for his exposed side. Lindsay raised the rifle to her shoulder, the cold metal, a familiar and steadying presence against her cheek. She didn't think. She acted. The first shot was a clean, deafening crack that echoed off the canyon walls. The alpha, the key to the pack's courage, dropped without a sound. The pack scattered for a half-second, their frenzied attack broken by confusion. That was all the time she needed. Crack! A second wolf, lunging back in, yelped and fell. Crack! A third, trying to drag the man by his arm, crumpled. The remaining wolves, their nerve finally broken, melted back into the shadows they had come from their predatory howls, replaced by fading whimpers. Silence descended heavy and absolute, broken only by the ragged, pained gasps of the man on the ground and the gurgling last breaths of his horse. Lindsay kept the rifle ready, scanning the darkness for a long moment before cautiously making her way down the slope. He was a mess of blood and dirt. His clothes were torn to ribbons, revealing deep gashes on his arms and a savage bite on his left thigh. His face was turned away from her, obscured by a curtain of long black hair, matted with sweat and grime. The knife was still clutched in his hand, its blade stained dark. "Don't move," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through her. "The pack's gone." The man grunted a sound of pure agony as he tried to push himself up. He collapsed back with a groan. Lindsay knelt, keeping a respectable distance. "I'm not going to hurt you. Let me see the damage." He slowly, painfully turned his head. In the pale moonlight, his features were stark and chiseled. A strong jaw, a straight nose, and eyes so dark they seemed to drink the light. They were eyes that held a fire, a fierce and untamed pride that even excruciating pain couldn't extinguish. But they were also eyes filled with a deep, bottomless suspicion. He said nothing, merely watching her, his knuckles white around the handle of his knife. He wasn't a cowboy. His buckskins were well made, but unadorned, practical, not flashy. And there was something about his stillness, his sheer physical presence that was different. He wasn't from around Serenity's Peak, the dusty settlement some 10 miles west. She knew nearly everyone there, at least by sight. "That leg needs tending," she stated more to herself than to him. "It's bit clean through. The horse, there's nothing for him." The man's gaze flickered to his fallen mount, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than pain crossed his face. It was loss. "Can you stand?" she asked. He tried again, bracing himself on one hand. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and he swayed. Without thinking, Lindsay moved closer, grabbing his arm to steady him. His skin was hot with fever, but the muscle beneath was like coiled steel. He flinched at her touch, a reflexive, instinctive recoil, but he didn't pull away. "My cabin is just over that rise," she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "You can die out here from the fever if the wolves didn't finish you, or you can let me help. Your choice." For a long moment, he just stared at her, his dark eyes seeming to search for something in her face. He was assessing her, weighing her motives, with an intensity that was unnerving. Finally, with a barely perceptible nod, he relinquished the fight. He let his weight lean against her, and the knife, at last, slipped from his grasp and fell silently into the dust. The debt had been paid with gunpowder, but as Lindsay half dragged, half carried the heavy stranger towards the solitary light of her home, she had a chilling premonition that a far more complicated reckoning had just begun. Dragging the man into her cabin was a monumental effort. He was lean but dense with muscle, and every jostle elicited a pained hiss from between his clenched teeth. She got him onto the spare cot in the corner, the one her father had used in his final months. The cabin was a single room, but she'd made it a home. A stone hearth dominated one wall, a sturdy table and 2 chairs sat in the center, and her own bed was tucked into the opposite corner. It was sparse, but it was clean and orderly. The man collapsed onto the cot, his consciousness flickering. The fever was already setting in a dangerous heat radiating from his skin. Lindsay worked with a grim efficiency. She lit another lantern, filling the small space with a warm, steady glow. She fetched water from the basin, her hands moving with the certainty of someone who has tended to injuries before, both animal and human. First, she had to cut away the ruined buckskin from his thigh. The wound was worse than she'd thought in the dark. It was a deep, ragged tear, the flesh bruised and swelling. Wolf bites were notoriously foul. Infection was the real killer. As she worked, she studied him more closely. His skin was a dark, burnished copper, weathered by sun and wind. A long, faded scar ran along his jawline, a testament to a previous brush with violence. There was no brand on him, no emblem, nothing to give away his allegiance or origin. He was a ghost, a man who seemed to have ridden straight out of the wilderness itself. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, a brutal but necessary act. He jerked violently on the cot, his body arching in a silent scream, but he didn't cry out. A sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. Lindsay's jaw was tight with empathy, but her hands remained steady. After cleaning it, she ground up a poultice of yarrow and comfrey from the dried bunches hanging from the rafters. Remedies her father had learned from a travelling Pima woman years ago, and applied it carefully before binding the leg with clean strips of linen. She did the same for the other gashes on his arms and ribs. For 3 days, he was lost to the fever. He drifted in and out of a delirious state, muttering words in a language she didn't recognize. The words were soft, guttural, flowing like water over stones. It was an Apache dialect. She was sure of it. Tensions between the settlers and the local Chiricahua bands were at an all-time high, fueled by broken treaties and a string of retaliatory raids. Harboring an Apache, even a dying one, was more than dangerous. It was treason in the eyes of men like Bart Corrigan, the cattle baron, whose vast herds grazed right up to the edge of the reservation lands. Lindsay pushed the thought away. She had found a man dying. Her conscience, forged in the crucible of this harsh land, demanded she help. The politics of it could wait. She spooned broth and water between his cracked lips when he was lucid enough to swallow. She kept the poultices fresh and bathed his fevered brow with cool water. In his delirium, he sometimes thrashed his hands, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Once, his eyes snapped open and focused on her with a startling clarity. He spoke a single sharp word. It sounded like a question, but his gaze was filled with such raw hostility that she instinctively took a step back. Then, just as quickly, the fever pulled him back under. On the 4th day, the fever broke. She awoke to find him sitting up on the cot, his back ramrod straight, his dark eyes clear and watchful. He was watching her, and she had the distinct impression he had been for some time. The silence in the small cabin was thick with unspoken questions. The fevers passed. She said, her voice a little rough from sleep. She stood and moved to the stove to make coffee. "You were out for 3 days." He didn't respond. He simply watched her every move, his stillness that of a predator. His bound leg was stretched out in front of him, and she could see he had already tested its strength. "My name is Lindsay Northrop." She offered, pouring coffee into a tin mug. "This is my land." She placed the mug on the small crate beside his cot. He looked at the mug, then back at her. "Cole," he said. His voice was a low baritone, rough from disuse, but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. It was a simple common name, a lie she suspected, but a lie she would accept for now. "Well, Cole," she said, leaning against the main table with her own mug. "You're lucky. Another hour out there and you'd have been Corrian." His eyes met hers over the rim of the cup she'd given him. There was no gratitude in them, only a cool, calculating assessment. "You shoot well." "I have to," she replied simply. The days that followed were filled with a strange, strained domesticity. Cole, as she called him, was a man of profound silence. He rarely spoke, unless asked a direct question, and even then his answers were clipped and unrevealing. He healed with an almost unnatural speed. Within a week he was hobbling around the cabin, his movements still stiff, but regaining their fluid grace. He was an unnerving guest. He never seemed to be at rest, even when sitting perfectly still. His eyes were always moving, cataloguing, noticing things she'd long since taken for granted, the way a floorboard creaked under a certain weight, the direction of the wind judged by the dust devils in the distance, the faint track of a coyote that had passed by in the night. He was reading the world around him, like a book written in a language only he knew. One afternoon he pointed to the Winchester above the hearth. 1893. Good rifle. Heavy. It was my father's, she said, not elaborating. He nodded, a gesture of understanding that seemed to encompass more than just the rifle. He looked around the cabin, at the carefully patched roof, the neatly stacked firewood, the small vegetable garden, visible through the open door. You are alone here. It wasn't a question. I manage, she said, a defensive edge to her tone. He turned his intense gaze back to her. It is not a place for a woman alone. A spark of anger flared in Lindsay's chest. This is my home. I'm not a damsel to be rescued or a squatter to be pushed out. I was born here. I'll die here. A flicker of something respect, perhaps, crossed his face. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and said no more on the matter. Their quiet routine was shattered a week later by the sound of approaching horses. It wasn't the slow, plodding gait of a prospector's mule. It was the confident, rhythmic beat of riders with a purpose. Cole was on his feet in an instant, his body tensing. He instinctively moved towards the darkest corner of the cabin, away from the door, his hand resting on the hilt of the knife Lindsay had returned to him. "It's just the sheriff," she said, recognizing the sound. But she felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Sheriff Brody was a decent man, but he was a man who walked a fine line in a town increasingly controlled by Bart Corrigan's money and influence. He reined in his horse outside the cabin, his gaze taking in everything. "Morning, Lindsay," he called out, his eyes lingering on the hide of the grey wolf she had pegged out to dry on the side of the cabin. "Heard some shooting out this way a week or so back. Everything all right? Just a wolf pack getting bold," she answered, stepping out onto the porch, deliberately blocking the view into the cabin. "I handled it." Brody nodded, but his eyes were sharp. "Just the wolves' word is Corrigan lost a few head of cattle over on the north range. He's blaming the Apache, of course, riling folks up." Lindsay's stomach went cold. Corrigan blames the Apache if the wind blows the wrong way. "Maybe so," Brody said, his gaze unwavering. "But you're a long way out here, Lindsay. It's not safe, especially if you're entertaining guests." His eyes flicked meaningfully toward the cabin door. He had seen something, a shadow, a movement. The sheriff wasn't a fool. "I can take care of myself, Sheriff," she said, her voice harder than she intended. "I hope so," he said, turning his horse. "Because if Corrigan's men find an Apache warrior healing up in your cabin, they won't wait for a trial, and they won't much care about who gets caught in the crossfire. You be careful." He tipped his hat and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and a heavy silence in his wake. Lindsay turned and went back inside. Cole was standing exactly where she had left him, a statue carved from granite and shadow. The air between them crackled. Her secret was no longer just hers, and the world which she had tried so hard to keep at arm's length was now coming for them both. The sheriff's visit was a stone tossed into a still pond, and the ripples of unease spread through the following days. The fragile peace inside the cabin was replaced by a taut, unspoken tension. Cole was more restless than ever, his recovery nearly complete. He would stand for hours at the small window, a silhouette against the harsh sunlight, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains, his mountains. Lindsay knew he had to leave. She also knew that every moment he stayed, the danger to both of them grew exponentially. She found herself in a precarious position. She had saved him, tended to him, and in the quiet, shared moments, a grudging respect had formed between them. She saw not the savage caricature peddled in Serenity's Peak, but a man of quiet dignity and fierce intelligence. Yet she didn't even know his real name or why he was alone and on foot so far from the reservation. The confrontation she had been dreading arrived not on a sheriff's horse, but in a cloud of arrogant dust. Bart Corrigan did not travel lightly. He rode with 2 men, his foreman, Flint Maddox, and another hired gun. Maddox was a hard case, with eyes as pale and empty as a winter sky, his hand never far from the butt of his Colt. Corrigan himself was a bull of a man, his expensive suit and vest incongruous in the rugged landscape. He ran Serenity's Peak, owning the saloon, the general store, and the loyalty of half the men in the valley. And he wanted Lindsay's land. Her ranch had the only year-round spring for miles, a fact that gnawed at Corrigan like a disease. They reined in their horses, deliberately trampling a section of her small garden. It was a petty act of dominance. Northrop, Corrigan boomed, not bothering to dismount. "We're tracking rustlers. Saw some Apache sign heading this way." "I haven't seen any sign," Lindsay said evenly, stepping onto her porch. The Winchester was just inside the door within arm's reach. Maddox smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. "That's so funny. Sheriff Brody seemed to think you had company." Lindsay's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face a mask of stone. The sheriff was mistaken. "Was he?" Corrigan's eyes narrowed, scanning the property. "My patience is wearing thin, woman. I've made you a fair offer for this worthless patch of dirt. Refusing it is starting to look mighty foolish, especially now with the Apache getting bold." Just then, the cabin door creaked open. Cole stepped out into the sunlight. He moved with a newfound strength, his limp barely noticeable. He wasn't armed, save for the knife at his belt, but he radiated an aura of such lethal stillness that all 3 riders tensed. His dark eyes were fixed on Corrigan, cold and unblinking. Maddox's hand went to his gun. "Well, well, what do we have here? Looks like the sheriff wasn't mistaken after all." "This is my business, gentlemen," Lindsay said, her voice sharp as glass. "This man was injured. I gave him aid. He'll be on his way." Corrigan let out a short, ugly laugh. "Gave him aid? You're harboring a red-skinned savage while his brothers are stealing my cattle. That's not neighborly Northrop. That's treason." Cole took a slow step forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Lindsay. He addressed Corrigan directly, his voice low and resonant, carrying easily in the still air. "Your cattle wander. They foul the water. My people do not steal sick animals." The insult was subtle but clear, and a flush of angry red crept up Corrigan's thick neck. "You've got a mouth on you, boy. We know how to shut mouths like yours." Maddox, seeing his chance, spurred his horse forward, intending to ride Cole down. It was a classic move of intimidation. But what happened next was so fast, Lindsay almost missed it. Cole didn't retreat. He stood his ground, and as the horse loomed over him, he moved with the speed of a striking snake. In one fluid motion, he sidestepped, grabbed the horse's bridle with one hand, and struck a precise, powerful blow with the other, to a nerve cluster in the animal's neck. The horse let out a pained shriek and reared violently, its eyes wide with panic. Maddox, caught completely by surprise, was thrown from the saddle landing, hard in the dust, with a grunt. The second rider drew his pistol, but before he could aim, Cole had already scooped up a handful of dirt and rocks. With a flick of his wrist, he threw it directly into the man's face. The rider cried out, dropping his gun to claw at his eyes. It was over in seconds. Cole stood between the 2 unhorsed men, his posture relaxed, but radiating menace. Maddox scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of fury and humiliation, his hand reaching for his gun again. "I wouldn't," Cole said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. He hadn't moved, but Maddox froze his hand hovering over the butt of his Colt. He had seen something in Cole's eyes, a promise of violence so swift and final that it overrode his own rage. Corrigan, his face, purple, finally found his voice. "Who in the hell are you?" Cole turned his head slowly, and his gaze was like flint striking steel. For the first time he spoke in his own tongue, the words sharp and clear, imbued with an ancient authority that seemed to make the very air vibrate. "Shie nachai mangas bie." He then switched back to English, his voice resonating with cold pride for Lindsay and the others to hear. "I am Nache, son of Mangas, chief of the Chiricahua. This land you stand on was ours before your grandfathers knew what a horse was. I was not stealing your sick cattle. I was on a pilgrimage to the place of my birth alone, as is the custom. You are the thieves, Corrigan. You steal the water, you starve the land, and you blame us for your own greed." The revelation struck Lindsay with the force of a physical blow. Nache. The name was whispered with fear and awe in the territory. Not just an Apache warrior, but the son of the most powerful and reclusive chief in the region, a prince in all but name. He wasn't just a random drifter she had saved. He was a figure of immense importance, the heir to a legacy of resistance against the very world that Corrigan represented. Corrigan's face went pale, then hardened with a new kind of resolve. The situation had just escalated from a simple land dispute to something far more significant. He saw his opportunity. "So," Corrigan spat, a venomous smile spreading across his face as he looked at Lindsay. "The little homesteader is bedding down with Apache royalty. This is better than I thought. The whole town will be interested to hear about this. When they find out you're siding with the chief's son, they'll run you out of this valley themselves." He wheeled his horse around, gesturing for his humiliated men to follow. "This isn't over, Northrop. Not by a long shot." As they rode away, leaving a trail of threats hanging in the air, Lindsay looked at the man beside her. He was no longer Cole, the silent, mysterious stranger. He was Nache, the Apache prince. And by saving his life, she had irrevocably tied her fate to his, placing them both in the crosshairs of a war that was about to ignite. The dust from Corrigan's departure settled slowly, leaving behind a silence that was heavier and more dangerous than the confrontation itself. Lindsay stared at Nache, seeing him for the first time. The quiet intensity, the pride that wouldn't break the deep, watchful eyes, it all made sense now. He carried the weight of his people, a burden she couldn't begin to comprehend. "You should have told me," she said, her voice quiet but strained. It wasn't an accusation, but a statement of fact. "Would it have mattered?" he asked, turning to face her. "When you found me, I was a man with a wolf's teeth in his leg. My name would not have changed that." "It changes everything now," she countered, gesturing vaguely towards the road to town. "Corrigan won't let this go. He doesn't just want my land anymore. He has you. You're the perfect excuse to rally the town to get the army involved. He'll paint you as a spy, a raider, and me as your collaborator." Nache's expression was grim. He will not need to lie. He will create the truth he wants. His gaze drifted back towards the mountains. For 2 seasons, Corrigan has been diverting the water from the Tienaga Creek. It is a slow trickle now. The grass withers. The game moves on. My people are strong, but he is patient. He plans to starve us into submission or force us into a fight we cannot win. Suddenly the pieces clicked into place for Lindsay. Corrigan's seemingly random acts of aggression, the constant accusations of rustling the pressure on small landowners like herself who controlled water sources, it was all part of a larger, more sinister strategy. "The cattle he claims you stole," she murmured, thinking aloud. "He's hiding them. He's creating a phantom menace to justify moving against your people and seizing the last of the free water. He is a man who builds his own ladder and calls it justice, Nachai said. I came to see the extent of his theft with my own eyes. I was on my way back to my father when the wolves found me. They stood there, two people, from impossibly different worlds, united by a common enemy. Lindsay felt a wave of despair followed by a surge of defiant anger. This was her home. Her father had poured his life into this soil. She would not be run off by a bully like Corrigan, no matter the pretext. He'll fail, she said, the words tasting like a prayer and a vow. Nachai looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. You have courage, Lindsay Northrop, more than most of the men who call me a savage. It's not courage, she said, shaking her head. It's all I have left. If I run from him, I have nowhere to go. This land is all that's left of my family. A silent understanding passed between them. They were both fighting for their heritage, for the legacy of their fathers. Corrigan thinks he has us trapped. Lindsay continued, her mind racing. He'll use my betrayal to turn the town against me, making it impossible for me to get help. He'll use your presence here as proof of an impending Apache attack. He will send his foreman, the one called Maddox, to watch you, Nachai predicted, to ensure you do not speak to the sheriff, to isolate you completely. Then we can't be seen together, she realized. You have to leave. Now. Go back to your people, warn them. And leave you here to face him alone. The thought was clearly unacceptable to him. A debt had been formed between them, one he felt bound to honor. I do not leave my allies to be devoured. We're not allies, she snapped, the fear making her words sharp. We're a complication. The best way you can help me is to disappear. If you're gone, maybe this will all die down. It will not, he stated with absolute certainty. Corrigan has seen my face. He knows who I am. He will not rest. He will see this as a gift from his gods. He will hunt me, and he will use you as the bait. He was right. Corrigan was too cunning to let such an opportunity slip by. Lindsay felt the walls closing in. She was a pariah in town, and her only protector was the very man whose presence endangered her. It was a cruel paradox. So what do we do? She asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. I can't fight him, and you can't be seen. Nachai was silent for a long moment, his gaze sweeping the horizon, as if reading a map only he could see. There is a way, he said finally. But it is dangerous. You will have to trust me. Trust you? She scoffed, a humorless laugh escaping her lips. A week ago I didn't even know your name. Now I'm supposed to trust you with my life. He stepped closer, his proximity unnerving. His dark eyes bored into hers, demanding to be seen, to be understood. You did not ask my name when you pulled me from the dust. You did not ask if I was Apache or Mexican or white. You saw a man who needed help. I see a woman who needs the same. My father says a man's honor is shown not by the promises he makes, but by the debts he repays. I owe you my life. I will not see it wasted. His words stripped away her defenses. He was right. Her actions had been based on a simple human principle. Now he was offering the same in return. It was a strange and terrifying proposal, an alliance between a reclusive rancher and an Apache prince, a pact sealed in blood and circumstance against a common foe. What is this plan? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Corrigan's strength is the town's fear, Nachai explained. We must show them who the real snake is. You said he is hiding the cattle he claims were stolen. We must find them. We must find proof of his lies and deliver it not to his paid men, but to the one man who might listen, your sheriff. Brody is cautious, Lindsay warned. He won't act without irrefutable proof. Then we will find it, Nache said with finality. I will move in the shadows. I will watch. I will learn the movements of Corrigan's men. You will be my eyes and ears in the world of the white man. When the time is right, we will strike. Not with rifles, but with the truth. She looked at him at the fierce determination in his eyes, and felt a sliver of hope cut through the fear. It was an insane, desperate plan. It would require her to lie, to dissemble, to risk everything on the word of a man she barely knew, a man her entire society considered an enemy. But looking at Nache, she didn't see an enemy. She saw a warrior fighting for his people's survival. She saw the man who had faced down a wolf pack and Corrigan's thugs with the same unbending courage. She saw her only chance. All right, she breathed the word sealing their unholy alliance. Tell me what I need to do. Nache vanished as silently as he had appeared. One moment he was there, a solid presence by the hearth. The next, as dusk settled, he had slipped out the door and melted into the landscape. Lindsay was alone again, but the nature of her solitude had changed. It was no longer a peaceful isolation. It was a siege. Just as Nache had predicted, Corrigan began to tighten the screws. The first sign was the whispers in town. When Lindsay rode into Serenity's Peak for supplies a few days later, the atmosphere was palpably different. Mr. Henderson, the usually jovial general store owner, could barely meet her eye, his movements stiff and formal. Women who used to nod a polite greeting now turned their backs, gathering in small, gossiping clutches. The word was out. Lindsay Northrop, the proud, solitary woman from the edge of the territory, was an Indian lover. The whispers followed her down the dusty main street, a poison that soured the air. They said she was helping the Apache raid their own people. They said the son of Chief Mangus was her lover. The lies were ugly and absurd, but they were potent. Fear was a weed that grew fast in the shallow soil of frontier towns, and Corrigan was an expert gardener. Flint Maddox became a near-constant presence. He and another of Corrigan's men took to riding the perimeter of her property, a silent, menacing patrol. They never trespassed, never gave her a legal reason to complain to Sheriff Brody, but their message was clear: you are being watched. Every time she went to the well, every time she mended a fence, she could feel their eyes on her. It was a war of nerves designed to break her spirit, to make her feel so utterly alone that she would finally break and sell. But Lindsay didn't break. She drew on the same deep well of stubborn resilience that had allowed her to survive for 3 years alone. She fixed her gaze on her work, refusing to give Maddox the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Inside, however, she was a knot of anxiety. Every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl sent a jolt through her, wondering if it was one of Corrigan's men or a sign from Nache. The signs, when they came, were subtle. A small, uniquely shaped stone left on her windowsill pointing in a specific direction. A broken branch on a trail that hadn't been broken the day before. These were his messages, telling her he was close, that he was watching the watchers. Their meetings were brief and perilous, conducted in the dead of night, in a thicket of mesquite a mile from her cabin. He would appear out of the darkness like a ghost, his form materializing from the shadows. Maddox and his man watch from the ridge to the east during the day. He told her during one such meeting, his voice a low whisper. At night, one of them circles south. They are predictable. They're trying to drive me mad, she confessed, the strain evident in her voice. Their minds are small, Nache replied, a statement of fact, not an insult. They think in straight lines. They believe that because they cannot see me, I am not here. In these stolen moments, under the cold light of the stars, their alliance deepened. It was forged in shared danger and a mutual, unspoken respect. She told him about the rumors in town, about Sheriff Brody's wary neutrality. He in turn shared his knowledge of the land. He taught her to read the signs she had never noticed before, to distinguish the track of a shod horse from an Apache pony, to know the meaning of a bird's alarm call. He was teaching her his language, the language of survival. She began to see the man behind the prince. She saw the sorrow in his eyes when he spoke of the land his people had lost, the fierce, protective love he held for them, and the immense pressure he was under as the son of their leader. One night the cold was particularly biting. She had brought a blanket with her, and seeing him shiver slightly in the thin night air, she held it out. Here. He looked at the blanket, then at her, and for a moment he hesitated. It was a simple gesture, but it crossed a boundary. He was the protector, the phantom in the dark. Accepting her comfort was an admission of his own vulnerability. Slowly he reached out and took it, wrapping it around his shoulders. The rough wool carried the faint scent of her cabin of wood smoke and lavender. "Thank you, Lindsay," he said, and the use of her full name felt strangely intimate in the vast, silent dark. "Corrigan is getting impatient," she whispered, pulling her own shawl tighter. "He's planning something. I can feel it." "He is," Nache confirmed. "I followed one of his men. He rode north towards the old box canyon by Skeleton Creek. They are moving the stolen cattle there." "The box canyon?" Lindsay's blood ran cold. "That's perfect. One way in, one way out. Easily defended. Brody would need a small army to go in there if Corrigan's men are dug in." "He is not just hiding them," Nache continued. "He is rebranding them. I found the remains of a fire. He is burning his own brand over the top of the originals. He means to sell them at the next auction in Tucson, claiming they are new stock." Here it was, the proof, the physical evidence they needed, but it was trapped in a fortress of rock guarded by hired guns. "How do we prove it?" she asked, her heart sinking. "No one can get in there." "You are wrong," Nache said, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. "There is a way, an old hunting trail my grandfather used. It leads up the back of the canyon wall. A man can climb it, but it is treacherous. From the top you can see everything." A daring, impossible plan began to form in the space between them. A plan that would require him to guide her into the heart of the enemy's camp. "I have to be the one to see it," she realized. "It has to be my word. If you are seen, they'll call it an Apache raid. They'll dismiss everything you say. But if I see it, if I can describe the brands, the location, Brody might just believe me." Nache was silent, the muscles in his jaw tight. The risk was enormous. He would be leading her into unimaginable danger. If they were caught, Corrigan and Maddox would not be merciful. "It is too dangerous," he said, his voice taut. "It's more dangerous to do nothing," she insisted, her whisper fierce. "We have no choice. This is our only chance to expose him before he starts a war." He looked at her, then his gaze intense. He saw not a frightened woman, but a resolute partner. He saw the same fire in her that burned within him. Her father had said, a steady hand was worth more than a soft heart. Lindsay Northrop, he realized, had both in equal measure. "Tomorrow night," he said, his voice filled with a grim finality, "when the moon is new, I will meet you at the 3 cottonwoods by the creek. Bring nothing that will make a sound. Wear dark clothes, and pray to your God that the sentries are lazy." The night was starless and absolute, a black velvet cloth thrown over the desert. Lindsay met Nache by the cottonwoods, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She carried only a knife and a small journal. He emerged from the shadows without a sound, a phantom of the night, and gave her a single sharp nod before leading the way. They moved through the treacherous landscape in a focused silence. After an hour, they reached the base of the canyon wall, a sheer cliff of black rock that seemed to scrape the sky. It looked impossible to climb. "The trail is here," Nache whispered, his voice, a breath in her ear. "The handholds are old but deep. Place your feet where I place mine. Do not look down." The climb was a waking nightmare. It was not a trail, but a series of precarious ledges and cracks in the rock. Nache moved with an unnerving, fluid grace, while Lindsay followed her muscles, screaming, her fingers raw. She focused only on his dark shape above her, clinging to the rock, and his quiet instructions, trusting him with every agonizing inch. Finally, they hauled themselves over the top and lay flat on the canyon rim, gasping for air. Below them, a fire cast flickering light across a narrow box canyon. It was Corrigan's operation. 2 guards slouched near the fire, while deeper in the canyon, a large herd of stolen cattle milled restlessly. As they watched, one of Corrigan's men pressed a glowing branding iron to a calf's flank. The animal's pained bellow echoed off the stone walls. This was it. The proof. With shaking hands, Lindsay opened her journal. She sketched the layout of the camp, the position of the guards, and the damning detail of Corrigan's Lazy C brand being burned over the top of another rancher's mark. Nache lay perfectly still beside her, his gaze sweeping the canyon, a silent, watchful guardian. He pointed to a dark cave mouth high on the opposite wall, where the silhouette of Flint Maddox kept watch over the entire scene. They remained for nearly an hour, Lindsay filling the pages with evidence. "We have what we need," Nache finally whispered. "We must go before the sky lightens." The descent was even more terrifying on exhausted limbs. Once Lindsay's foot slipped, sending a small cascade of pebbles into the darkness below. She froze, her heart stopping, but the sound was swallowed by the immense silence. When they reached the bottom, they didn't stop moving swiftly to put distance between themselves and the canyon. As the first hint of dawn grayed the eastern sky, they took shelter in a ravine. Lindsay sagged against a boulder, trembling with adrenaline and fatigue. "You were brave," Nache said, his voice a rare praise in the quiet morning. "I was terrified," she admitted breathlessly. He knelt beside her and gently took her hands. They were scraped and bleeding from the climb. With a tenderness that seemed at odds with his warrior's nature, he took a pouch from his belt and applied a powder of dried herbs to her wounds. His touch was both a comfort and a spark, an unspoken acknowledgement of the profound trust that now existed between them. In the crucible of the canyon, their alliance had been forged into something far deeper. He released her hands, his expression urgent. "You must go to the sheriff now," he commanded. "While their guard is down, show him what you found. I will stay hidden, but I will be close. If they come for you, I will be there." Lindsay clutched the journal to her chest. Her body ached, but her resolve was like steel. She had faced the devil in his canyon and had returned with the truth. Now she had to pray it would be enough. Lindsay didn't hesitate. She rode hard for Serenity's Peak, the rising sun at her back, the weight of the journal in her saddlebag a heavy, hopeful burden. She ignored the hostile stares on the main street as she dismounted and strode directly into the sheriff's office. Sheriff Brody looked up from his desk, his expression wary. "Lindsay, I hope you're not here with more trouble." "The right kind of trouble, Sheriff," she said, her voice clear and steady. She placed the leather journal on his desk, flipping it open. "You wanted proof? There it is." Brody's eyes scanned the pages, taking in the detailed sketches of the box canyon, the damning drawings of the altered brands, and the meticulous notes. He traced the JB brand, a grim recognition dawning on his face. John Peterson's brand. Stolen by Bart Corrigan, Lindsay stated flatly. He's holding them in Skeleton Canyon right now, rebranding them for the Tucson auction. It's how he's been running off small ranchers and blaming the Apache for years. The sheriff leaned back the evidence before him, undeniable yet politically explosive. This is his word against yours, Lindsay, and he practically owns this town. Before she could argue, the door burst open. Bart Corrigan stormed in his face, purple with rage, Flint Maddox at his heels. "Brody, I want this woman arrested," Corrigan roared, pointing a trembling finger at her. "She's a traitor. We have a witness who saw her last night, sneaking around the North Range with that Apache prince of hers. They're planning an attack." Sheriff Brody stood slowly, his hand coming to rest on his pistol. His gaze flickered from Corrigan's desperate fury down to the open journal. In that moment, he saw the full picture. "I don't arrest people based on your shouting, Bart, but I will be riding out to Skeleton Canyon to investigate a report of stolen property. And you," he added his voice, "like cold iron, are going to come with me." Corrigan paled. "That's Apache land. It's not safe." Suddenly a commotion erupted outside. Maddox peered through the window, his smug demeanor vanishing. "Sheriff, you better see this." At the edge of town stood Natchez. Behind him, in a silent, disciplined line, were 24 Chiricahua warriors on horseback. They were not painted for war, but sat with a powerful stillness, their presence an undeniable statement. At their head, an older chief with a face like weathered rock watched the town with ancient, knowing eyes. It was Chief Mangas himself. They had not come to fight, but to bear witness. The sight broke Corrigan's nerve. "An invasion!" he shrieked, his eyes wild. "They're here to burn us out!" He drew his pistol and aimed it at Lindsay. "It's all your fault, you—" The gunshot was deafening in the small office. It was Brody's. Corrigan cried out, staggering back as he clutched a bloody shoulder, his pistol clattering to the floor. Maddox lunged for the door, drawing his own Colt to rally a mob. But as he stumbled into the street, he found his path blocked. Natchez had dismounted and now strode to meet him in the center of the dusty road. Maddox raised his pistol. Natchez's knife flashed in the sun. A single shot went wide as Natchez's blade struck with disabling precision, and Maddox collapsed his gun arm, useless. The confrontation was over. In the stunning silence, Sheriff Brody and his deputies arrested the whimpering Corrigan and the injured Maddox. Then Brody walked alone to the center of the street, where he was met by Chief Mangas and Natchez. An understanding was reached, not a treaty, but a recognition of the truth. Corrigan's crimes were exposed, and a fragile peace born from a shared desire for justice settled over the valley. The water in the creek was freed, and the shadow of Corrigan's greed was lifted. Days later, as twilight painted the sky, Natchez came to Lindsay's ranch a final time. "My father sends his gratitude," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He calls you woman of steady heart." "And you?" she asked softly, her own heart a tangle of pride and sorrow. "What will you do? My path is with my people." He answered, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "The world is changing, and I must help them walk it." Their separate futures stretched before them, a canyon they could not cross together. He was a prince of the wilderness, she a queen of her solitary ranch. He stepped closer and took her hand, his touch warm and firm. "You will not be alone, Lindsay Northrop. My people will not forget. The watchers on the mountains will know this is a place of friends." With a final lingering look that spoke volumes, he mounted his horse. He didn't vanish into the shadows this time, but rode tall and proud toward the horizon, a leader returning to his destiny. Lindsay watched him go, the Winchester, a familiar weight against the cabin wall beside her. She was alone, but no longer lonely. She had her home, her honor, and the respect of an Apache prince. In this unforgiving land, that was more than enough. And so the story of Lindsay Northrop and the Apache prince comes to a close. It's a tale that reminds us that courage isn't about the absence of fear, but about acting in spite of it. It's about how the brave actions of one person can expose a deep-seated injustice and change the course of history for an entire community. Theirs was a bond forged in violence and secrecy, an alliance that crossed the deep, often bloody divide between two cultures, proving that honor and respect are not bound by race or station. It's a testament to the fact that even in the most lawless of times, the most powerful weapon can be the simple, unshakable truth. What did you think of Lindsay's incredible bravery? Could you have made the same choice in her position? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of the Old West captured your imagination, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who loves a great drama, and most importantly, subscribing to the channel for more true life tales from the frontier. Your support makes these stories possible. Thanks for listening.